Welcome to a short video summary of the Philips 65PUS7601. You can read the actual review via the link in the description or by clicking the info button at the top right of the screen. The 7601 is Philips' flagship Ultra HD TV for 2016. It uses a 65-inch 4K flat panel, has full array backlighting with 127 local dimming zones. It also includes support for high dynamic range and includes Android TV, and currently it retails for £2,000. In terms of its design, the 7601 is fairly minimalist. It has a brushed metallic border around the screen itself, and the whole panel sits on two chrome feet, one at either end. And these are about 111 centimeters apart, which means you're going to need a fairly wide surface on which to actually place the TV. Although of course you can also wall mount the 7601, and there are 4x400 Visa mounts on the rear of the panel for this purpose. There's also a small illuminated logo beneath the screen itself, which you can, if you want to, turn off. In terms of its connections, these are on the left-hand side as you face the screen, and there are 4 HDMI inputs, although only 2 of those inputs are actually HDMI 2.0A, which are the ones you're going to want to use for any 4K Ultra HD HDR sources. In terms of the connections themselves, some are sideways facing and some are downwards facing. In terms of downwards facing inputs, here are the 2 HDMI 2.0A inputs, along with the USB port and some legacy connections, and also the tuners. And on the sideways facing, you've got 2 more HDMI inputs and more USB ports. In terms of controlling this TV, it comes with the standard classic Philips dual-sided remote control. This is actually last year's model, which has a touch-sensitive pad here. Now this is actually quite sensitive, and we did find quite often we would zip past things we wanted to actually access because it was a bit too sensitive. So we did find that a little bit frustrating. But otherwise, it's a well-designed remote control. It's comfortable to hold, easy to use with one hand. And obviously on this side there is the QWERTY keyboard, which makes inputting things into the smart platform a lot easier. Now in terms of its features, obviously this is a Philips TV, so it comes with Ambilight. Now what is Ambilight? Ambilight is basically small LEDs in the rear of the panel itself that project light onto the screen behind the TV. In the case of the 7601, it's 3-sided Ambilight, which means there are LEDs down both the left and right hand side and along the top. When you're watching TV, these little LEDs can project either coloured lights to mimic what's on the screen, or it can just do a white light behind the TV. It can come on and off, or it can be a static light behind the TV. Now we actually prefer what's called the ISF mode, because this actually just projects a static neutral white light behind the TV. Basically it creates bias lighting behind the TV, and this can be really useful for watching TV at night particularly. It creates a very comfortable viewing environment, and it makes the blacks look better on the TV itself. So we really like Ambilight. It's a very useful feature. We're not completely sold on the whole disco lighting bit, but definitely the ISF white light behind the TV is a really good feature. In terms of other features, well, it's got a relatively low input lag. It can do 39 milliseconds, which is pretty good, and should be good enough for most gamers. But importantly, it also has game mode when it's receiving an HDR signal. This is going to be very important going forward as HDR gaming becomes more popular, and you can use game mode with HDR content. That's great. Also, it has a really low energy usage, which is very good for a screen of this size. And as I mentioned earlier, it includes support for high dynamic range. Specifically, it supports HDR10. In terms of the Android TV platform that it uses, we really like the way that Philips have implemented this particular platform. They've kept it clean and simple, it's robust, it hasn't crashed on us, and thanks to quad-core processing, it's also very responsive. As you go down through the various tiles, you'll find all the various apps that you'd want. Specifically in terms of video, you've got Amazon, Netflix, YouTube, and BBC iPlayer. And in the case of Amazon and Netflix, you've got 4K support, and they'll also be adding HDR support quite soon. In terms of its performance, we, as always, measured this TV using our Klein K10A color meter, the Meridio Fresco 6G pattern generator, and Calman 2016 calibration software. Unfortunately, the out-of-the-box performance was very disappointing. Now, it's not uncommon for out-of-the-box settings to have far too much blue in the grayscale, but we actually were using the ISF setting, specifically ISF Night, which we'd expect to be much more accurate, much closer to the industry standard D65. But as you can see from the graph, there's way too much blue in the grayscale. Now we can fix this. We can use the 2-point white balance control to bring that blue down. And in fact, when we did that, we could get a pretty accurate grayscale. But for an out-of-the-box performance, it was quite disappointing, although at least the gamma was tracking well. And as I said, it could be corrected using the white balance control. When we moved on to the color performance, as you can see from the graph, out of the box, because of all that blue in the grayscale, it's dragging all the colors towards blue. And as a result, it's really affecting particularly the secondary colors, but almost all the colors. I mean, basically the image is blue. Now again, once we calibrated the grayscale and taken all that blue out, then we had a nice accurate color performance, which actually was very good. But as I say, unfortunately the out-of-the-box performance was disappointing. In terms of HDR performance, the actual tracking of the PQ EOTF was actually pretty good. And the grayscale, again, was actually tracking quite well. However, this TV, whilst it is relatively bright, I mean, it can reach over 600 nits of peak brightness, and it can deliver over 500 nits on a full screen as well, not just on 10% window. So it is reasonably bright, but it's obviously not as bright as some models which are hitting over 1,000 nits, and thus it doesn't reach the threshold for Ultra HD Premium certification. However, it was still pretty good HDR, and there were still nice peak highlights, and the local dimming worked very well. In terms of its color performance though, the color gamut itself isn't as wide as some other TVs. We were only getting 54% of Rec 2020, and in terms of DCI-P3 within Rec 2020, although it was tracking it relatively well given the limitations of the color space, we're still only getting sort of 80 to 90% of DCI-P3 depending on how you measure it. So not as wide as many other TVs which are getting up to 100% or nearly 100% of DCI-P3. But overall, still a relatively good HDR performance, and certainly when you consider the price point, pretty good, and given that it's also got full array backlight and local dimming, that means that you aren't getting the haloing or bright corners or bright edges that we would get on some TVs with HDR content. In terms of the overall performance, certainly with standard dynamic range content, TV looked very good. Once we calibrated it, set it up correctly, we had nice accurate images. We had a little bit too much red in the flesh tones, but otherwise it was a very nice picture, great scaling, good motion handling, and in terms of HDR performance as well, also very good. Obviously this has got no 3D support at all. Philips dropped 3D at the end of last year, so this TV does not support 3D. But in terms of its standard dynamic range and high dynamic range performance, it was very good. So our only real complaint with this TV is the out-of-the-box accuracy, which was extremely poor. It can be fixed with some simple changes on the white balance control, but it is still disappointing to see a TV have such a poor performance out of the box, considering we would expect better from Philips. However, when you consider the performance overall, particularly after calibration, when you consider all the other features involved, things like the input lag and being able to use game mode with HDR content, when you consider the features, when you consider the price and the screen size, we're still happy to award the Philips 65PUS7601 an AV Forum's recommended badge. Thanks for watching.